Hello and welcome to another edition of Liberty Report Extra. This is where we go a little bit into more detail and we have a little bit more interaction with our guests. And I'm really happy to have today someone that I followed for a long time. He actually has spent time in glorious Lake Jackson, Texas, and that's my old friend Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. It's great to be with you,
It's
Daniel.
great to have you, Patrick. It's good to see you again. I follow you guys' work a lot. It seems like you guys are getting a lot of traction, which makes me very happy over at 21st Century Wire. You've got your shows, you've got articles that you put up, you've got scoops. You're getting a lot of attention. You're getting on a lot of the shows, which is a good thing. But one of the things that I've struggled with, especially on this war, on the Iran war, is the almost inability to do any reporting, really. I mean, first of all, you have an administration in the U.S. that literally lies without hesitation. That seems to me something new. We know, and we're not naive. We know that presidents lie and members of Congress lie, and et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to be on a whole other level. To the point is where your default is that's a lie until I can find and prove it true. Now, have you noticed this, and how does it affect your reporting or trying to make sense of what's happening?
You're not alone, Daniel. I mean, the Iranian government was complaining about this a while back as well, to the point now where they're just basically resigned to kind of stepping back and ignoring everything that comes out of the White House. And we do have to kind of take a broader view of this and look at this in terms of history, compare it to other past administrations. And I think it's absolutely ludicrous that the President of the United States can be conducting foreign policy from a website which he owns.
Yeah.
And it's oxymoronically named Truth Social. There's never been any truth on that website as far as I could ever see. But the problem is, Daniel, is that that's one of the actual problems here. It's totally unaccountable. It's not coming through official channels. So it's not policy. So what is it? Where are we? We're in this very strange gray area here. And I think it's ripe for abuse, and they have abused it. And I think that it's come at a huge cost. It's come at a cost to the country's credibility. I mean, forget the office of the presidency. It's been tarred so thoroughly in the last 18 months under this president. But it also means that the State Department is really just kind of this inert. I don't know what it is. It's definitely not the chief diplomatic sort of in department or agency in Washington anymore. And the Secretary of State is like, non-existent during half of these high-level negotiations. I mean, Marco Rubio might do a hot take to the press here and there, but he wasn't there in Geneva. Instead, they're sending a politician who's basically campaigning for the 2028 election and using it to grandstand for photo ops and get sound bites and absolutely abysmal negotiations. So, this is important because we can follow the tennis match back and forth, Daniel. What Trump said, and so there's peace in our time on Friday, and all of a sudden it's off by Sunday, and then it's back on again on Monday, and it's just back and forth. I think the Iranians have priced this in to the equation, much like the Russians have priced this in. The erraticism, the chaos, just the hypocrisy, the inability to follow through, and quite frankly, the unprofessionalism of this government not having any diplomats.
Yeah.
Dispatching your son-in-law and, a property developer from Long Island to handle some of the most important historic geopolitical crises and flashpoints is just unacceptable. And this is just regular now. This is accepted as the practice of this president. So, and the reason is because, Daniel, if you want to have a ceasefire, well, there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just announcing you have a ceasefire. Let's say we get past the memorandum of understanding phase and we get into the kind of, negotiations for an agreement, an actual binding agreement. You have to have contingencies in case it fails. That whole process of agreeing what those contingencies are, that happens behind closed doors. That could take, 4-6 months, perhaps. And then you get on to another interim agreement. So you have all these road signs over a 24-month period. And that's what the real process is like. That's what the joint comprehensive agreement for the JCPOA for the what they call the Iran nuclear deal that took nearly 2 years to glue together, and 6 countries, as
Yeah.
well as the European Union, and to guarantee it. The problem with the term deal, which the Trump administration has introduced as new parlance, really, is that it's totally vague. It's amorphous. Nobody knows, and that way you can't prove whether it was successful or not, and that's very convenient to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
A deal is not an agreement. It's not an accord, and it's definitely not a treaty. And that's one of the problems here. And that's why I hate to say this. I hate to say this, but I'm betting against their success every time because I know they don't have the framework or the personnel to actually deliver any
Yeah.
kind of negotiated settlement, whether it be in Ukraine, Gaza, or here in Iran. And it makes me sad to say that, but I'm being realistic
Yeah.
because I think this is a fundamental problem.
Well, I think, both of us have noticed for years the fundamental breakdown of the fourth estate, the media as a watchdog, as the people's watchdog over government. Now, that's been caused by a lot of things, of course, the corporatization of the press, the fact that the media is in very, very few hands, the concentration of the media in different hands. And we've had a real skepticism about the media for so long. But I think another component to what you're saying is, as bad as the media was, we're now in a situation where there's no checks being put to the administration. There's no one sitting there during a press conference saying, but Madam Speaker, or spokesperson, or Mr. President, or Secretary Rubio, you said this, and in fact, it's just not true because of X, because of Y, because of Z. And part of that is because these coveted chairs in those briefing rooms have now been taken up by sycophants rather than a healthy, skeptical media core. And those that are skeptical and trying to do their jobs, they will be discounted. You are fake news. I'm not going to answer that hostility. And what's ironic is that I, at least speaking for myself, have shared that hostility toward the mainstream media. And I think perhaps this administration taking that skepticism, taking the anger that we've all felt to the mainstream media, and now using it to their advantage, and what it's left us with is an absolute paucity of any sort of coverage, of any sort of checks on what the administration says. So we're not getting what we should be getting from the media to have a free society.
Yes, and there's been a few things that are, I think, historically significant. One is the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, declaring war on the press
Yes.
corps, basically, and then restricting access to the Pentagon, even having the absolute temerity to demand that their reporting goes by the desk of Pete Hegseth before it can go out for release. I mean, what kind of country are we living in here, And these are people who talk about, other countries as if they're authoritarian. I mean, that is just the most Stalinist move imaginable. But what's even more shocking, Daniel, as you rightly point out, was just the lack of outrage by the media. You'd think that the whole press would just close ranks at that point. And they really didn't. They just, it kind of went out with a whimper. And I know there was a court case, and I know that there's things going on through the legal routes on that, but still, these are all platforms with a megaphone. So they're not doing, for some reason, it's a little bit confounding and baffling that this Trump term, with the entire media, was railing against him in his first term and during Biden's term as well, for probably the most spurious types of charges and accusations. Now you have actual real world-changing crises here, and things that are just really negatively affecting the country and the world, not least of all the economy, but the position that this undeclared war of aggression on behalf of Israel has put the United States in. And you're not getting that sort of really reaction from the press. You're getting a little bit of good reporting here and there. I mean, even CNN has done some good journalism now and again as opposition, but not enough. And they're using his terms They're saying deal, deal, deal. They were doing this for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And the word memorandum of understanding didn't come into the press until 10 days later. So they're aping Trump's, lexicon. And it's just deceptive. And it completely takes the public and the audience, the readership off track, on Trump's track, basically, and not on the neutral, objective track is where they should be. As you said, fourth estate. That's where it should be, really, and pulling up J.D. Vance from just absolute lies in Geneva, saying that the IEA will have unfettered access to Iran, and there was no such thing discussed. And then Trump went and rebroadcast on his Truth Social platform, saying that it was an International Atomic Energy Agency access for all of eternity, until the end of time. Yeah. It's just patently ridiculous.
And that they will buy our GMO modified soybeans with their money that we give back to them, again pulled out of thin air and broadcast. To put Iran in the position of having to be the negative. No, we're not going to do that. No. So you make these deals, you assert things that aren't true to put on the back feet the other side of the party.
Yeah, and that if the press were really doing their job, Daniel, that soybean, that Jared Kushner, what J.D. Vance calls a classic Trump deal. Yeah. It's really, it was so cringeworthy to see him doing that in Geneva of all places. But that is basically corporate welfare. But taking Iranian frozen assets and using those as subsidies, or what the U.S. federal government would do. And why are the soybean farmers in that position to begin with? Is that because of Trump's disastrous tariff war against China? I think it is. Yeah. And also its disastrous move again with Brazil and the tit for tat that caused. So they're trying to use Iran to cover up their absolute abject failures in these other areas. The press should be all over that. It's kind of obvious. The exact same soya farmers. Yeah. So that would be a scandal of huge proportions if it were handled properly. The government needs that type of pressure put on it, because this is no way to do business. What they're doing right now, because they're not really going to advance the peace process if they're trying to stick it to Iran and force them to bail out U.S. corporations. Now, they might very well go with some kind of arrangement like that, because Iran is in a difficult bind because of sanctions. They haven't been able to sell oil and then get certain agricultural products in return. But again, that's a problem that the U.S. has imposed on Iran for no reason. What are the sanctions for? It's not for nuclear weapons, because they haven't developed any. Like, what is it for? Is it for a terrorist attack in 1994? Or like, what exactly? Is it for the peaceful protesters that nobody could find, the 50,000 that allegedly died?
No, I think it's 100,000 now, Patrick.
It could be.
It keeps rising.
Yeah.
And I think what you point out is important, though. It's the absence of a State Department. I think one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years is the U.S. inability to renegotiate or to continue any arms control agreements with Russia. Because the idea is that it's a zero-sum game. As you say, it's a deal. It's like you going to buy an apartment or a condo from Donald Trump, and you get a deal, the terms of which change once you move in. Oh, it doesn't come with plumbing. You should have known that. These sorts of things. And we don't have a State Department. We have a Jared Kushner. And Jared Kushner is not capable of, now he may be very smart in what he does, that's debatable, but nevertheless, he doesn't think in terms of a national interest. He doesn't think in terms of bringing the depth of the State Department. I know we can be very critical of the State Department and the Pentagon, but we both know there are people in there who are experts in their field, who actually are patriotic people who know a lot and should be brought to bear. We saw what happened when Witkoff came back just after maybe it was before the February 28th attacks. He came back, and what he recited to the press demonstrated an absolute misunderstanding or lack of understanding about nuclear weapons, about the technical aspects of the nuclear weapons, and about what the Iranians in fact told him in the negotiating. We had to depend on the Qataris to explain, no, this isn't what happened whatsoever. Something very, very different took place. So when you have people like Witkoff and Kushner going in and not thinking like a diplomat would think, and not having the training the diplomat would have, you get, as you point out, deals rather than agreements.
Not only that, but the way in which those two conduct their quote diplomacy is they're not writing anything down, they're not keeping records, and they're in a very powerful position there. They could go to meet representatives from Russia, and they could go back not having any real as far as I've heard, they don't have their own translators. They don't have the transcriptions of the conversations, so they could go and tell the president whatever they want to tell the president and filter information to Trump. And we all know that's a huge problem with this president because everybody seems to be doing that with him, and therefore he's completely uninformed and ultimately out of the loop. He's being fed exactly what people around him want him to hear. And that's a huge problem. The joke of this is, Daniel, that the Russians have not been fooled by this vaudeville act at all. They deployed their own sort of pseudo-diplomat, Kirill Dmitrov, who is very clever and very versed in American politics and culture as a type of a babysitter for Witkoff and Kushner, because the Russians realize this isn't serious diplomacy. They're not sending their head of their chief foreign policy person. So we're not going to send Lavrov. Yeah. We'll send our pseudo diplomat. He'll babysit Witkoff and Kushner, and we're just going to go on with business on the ground in Donbass. And that's exactly what's happened. Russia's priced in this unprofessionalism by the United States. But again, this comes at a huge cost. The cost is repeated failures at various junctures and at various impasses, repeated failures. And this could bring us back into war. Arguably, this is the risk with Ukraine and Russia, but with Iran as well. There's so many different ways this could fail because, of course, we're not dealing with just the U.S. and Iran. We're dealing with the U.S., Iran, and then Israel standing behind the U.S. And Kushner and Witkoff are there to look after Israel's interests. That's why they are embedded in that role. Yes. And that's just, to me, unbelievable that this has been allowed to continue as long as it has. They should have been out of the way. The Gaza Board of Peace thing is an abomination, as was the Abraham Accords. Yeah. And again, it's the president allowing his son-in-law to determine the trajectory of the future of the United States of America as it sits in the world. I mean, it's kind of outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, if you get in a screwy real estate deal, you may lose some money. You may screw the other guy out of some money, but at the end of the day, it's just a real estate deal. We're talking about the United States, the credibility of the United States. So people would laugh and say, oh, you guys are so naive. What credibility? But there is something left to credibility. There is something to benefit us in being able to be believed in what we say. And when the whole world doesn't believe you, you become, sort of, late British Empire. You become like, 1956 Suez or something, where you huff and you puff and nobody believes what you have to say anymore. But one thing I want to ask you about now, so I think we both agree now that the sort of the mainstream media is not doing its job. Even the alternative media is not doing its job. You have a lot of citizen journalists out there. I know 21st Century Wire does a great job, but when you devolve it to sort of posts on X or news organizations that pop up out of the blue on X, and they have fancy sounding names like in Iran International News. It turns out it has nothing to do with Iran whatsoever. And then you dig a little deeper and you find out that a lot of these so-called influencers are getting paid, not only by our government or by people of special interests here, but we know in the case of, for example, Salem Media, they're actually getting paid by the Israeli government, which I guess is sort of like being paid by our government anyway, right? Because the money goes from us to them, and then they pay Salem Media to propagandize us in favor of Israel. So you have this sort of distortion of what the media is supposed to be. And one of the phenomena, I know that you've noticed this, but the phenomena of Axios and of Barak Ravid, he seems to be playing a really interesting, and I would say not healthy role. But what have you noticed about Axios and Barak Ravid?
Well, he's clearly an Israeli mouthpiece embedded in this new insurgent mainstream media outlet that, quite frankly, came out of nowhere. I never understood the pedigree of this organization, but nonetheless, they do report on inside baseball in Washington. I suppose it's accurate, but it's not a lot. It's not all that different from what you see in the Huffington Post or across some of the other old broadsheet type media outlets like the Times and the Washington Post. But Barack Ravid has been caught out, and I think it's widely known now. And I've seen him having to shift and moderate his own sort of reporting, but that's only temporary, Daniel. So he'll be getting placement on the Sunday morning consensus building talk shows, NBC, and he'll still be a go-to person, and then he'll win the trust back, and then he'll start inserting Israeli key propaganda and talking points in there and into the mix. He is a very important and very skilled operator.
Yeah.
And I believe it does appear, looking at his track record, that he is an Israeli plant in the U.S. mainstream media. Way too central and consequential of a position for somebody like that. I mean, I've never been a big fan, Daniel, of ex-intelligence people in media. As pundits, yes. As guests, yes. And I'm not against them hosting their shows. I'm a big fan of John Kiriakou as an example, but to have them in as quote, to fill the role of quote journalist in those normal positions that we normally have cycling through media coverage, mainstream media coverage, and dealing with such very important, sensitive, historic sort of chains of events like this, especially Israel, Iran, Lebanon. I think it's completely inappropriate.
Yes.
But then again, so is dispatching an ambassador to Israel that seems to be shilling for the host country where he's posted to, and not America. So we have a lot of these strange things happening now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was funny. I was listening to our I think our mutual friend Larry Johnson. He was on a show the other day, and someone said, "How can you help us get to the truth?" And he said, "You're asking someone who was paid to lie to get to you the truth," which is a fact. I mean, people in intelligence, especially on the operations side, are paid to lie. That's what they do. And, if they do it in the service of their country, that's one thing. But as you say, there's always a question. Like when Pompeo and, any of the others are out there, Radcliffe or the others are out there on the TV, what are you being told? And I think the same thing is true with Ravid, who I think was Unit 8200 propagandist for the IDF. And I would say not only is he giving us Israeli propaganda, but I think there are people inside the White House who leaked to him. Now, we know that's always been the case. If you're the Washington Post, you develop your sources in an administration, and that's kind of how things go. But when you have conveniently timed leaks, a source in the White House said that Netanyahu and Trump are really not getting along, and Trump even used the F word against him. That seems to be serving a purpose rather than informing the American public of something, rather than getting out news, getting out information that a certain group within the White House want to get out, trying to frame the issue that way.
Yeah, absolutely. There's another bias that's kind of built in as well that a lot of people don't know, is that Daniel, looking back, remember the 70s and 80s, when did you ever see the CIA director doing media spots?
Never.
Like almost never. Now they're sort of in the rotation, which I find to be very weird. And I don't like it. I think it's not good, and it speaks a lot to the problems, the structural problems that we've developed now in our politics, and also a lack of, I think, integrity for those agencies and institutions and those positions. They've really just kind of sold out in that respect and just become so politicized. But even then, there's so many the revolving door now between Washington and media is so pervasive that you have people in media that are from the previous administrations, and they would like nothing more than to, depending on the next election result, be back in government.
Yeah.
And so they moderate what they say.
Yes.
And that goes for the podcasting circuit in the so-called alternative media or the mainstream alternative media. There's people that are clearly not wanting to go too hard on J.D. Vance because they want a position in a Vance administration.
That's
quite clearly, and that's not good because they're holding back, or they're not pushing hard on certain issues because they don't want to rock the boat. And I see this right across the board. I see it everywhere because now with Trump, the barriers have come down in terms of like who is qualified to be in the cabinet now.
Yeah, it's
And
come down. Yeah.
it's come down substantially, but there are qualified people as well, but they're also in media right now. Like normally in the old days, Daniel, the parking space for, somebody laying in wait would be like the Atlantic
Yeah.
in the Atlantic Council,
Yeah.
and there's a few of these think tanks, Heritage and, American Enterprise Institute. They parked there for 4 years,
Yeah.
like Mike Pompeo. That's where he was hanging out, slumming it at the Atlantic Council, shilling for Israel, and then hoping he's going to get the call to either be vice president or some other sort of high-level national security advisor or whatever. And it didn't work out for him, unfortunately. What a shame.
Yeah, poor guy.
But now they loiter in the podcasting circuit as well, because that's where all the numbers are. That's where the views are. So I would question certain people in their motivation. And I'm talking a lot of people who I really like. I really like them, and I like 80% of what they say. But I also notice they're holding back 10%.
Yeah,
they're holding back 20% because they don't want to alienate their future potential ticket. Like for instance, not criticizing Tulsi Gabbard, not holding her up on her principles and ideals, where she had an opportunity to really push back on the president when he threw her under the bus.
Yeah.
When she, put her intelligence assessment forward, Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
Had she resigned at that time, she could have really damaged the case to war at that time. If this is a person who was selling "Don't Bomb Iran" T-shirts in 2018 on her website. So we all supported Tulsi back then, but many of us were like, "What's going on here? Why isn't she speaking out against this?" It was explained to me by a good friend in Washington that she doesn't want to ruin her chances to get invited on a ticket for 2028. And so, but that's not unusual for Washington, is it? This is kind of how things work. But at the end of the day, should the pundits in the podcast circuit or in the media be holding back on their criticism of that? Yeah. Because they want a position in that potential ticket or administration as well. So I do, and that's why I like journalists who don't have political aspirations, because you're going to get an honest take from them.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, I'm trying to think, trace it back when this started. I mean, maybe it was Jamie Rubin under Clinton, but for example, if you look at someone like Marlon Fitzwater, who was a spokesman, his job was basically to lie, to give the White House spin. But after he did his time there, unless I have a huge gap in my memory, he did nothing except he did write a book on what it was like to be the spokesperson. But that was it. You're done. You're done. And you don't have that now. You have Ari Fleischer and all these people going into the media, from every administration. You're right. Absolutely in the media, probably pulling punches. And even if they're not wanting to get back into an administration, they want to pull the punches because they want to keep their sources going, and they also want to keep the high salaries. So it really is does a disservice to the American people. Yeah,
and again, but Jen Psaki is another one.
Oh,
pretty much all this media spokesperson, most of them go into media, but yeah, you're right, and again, I'm very complimentary of some former intelligence people that have given up so much of their time and effort to get the truth out on all of these key foreign policy theaters. Yeah. And I think they've done a tremendous job in opening up the conversation. Yeah. On this.
John and Larry and several others. Yeah.
Those ones, Ray McGovern, Larry Johnson. Yeah. They have forced, and Judge Napolitano and people like this, they've forced the mainstream. They've really forced open the Overton window on some of these conversations, and I think that is amazing. And we owe them. Scott Ritter's another one. He's just the work that he puts in is yeoman's labor is an understatement. Yeah. He is really at it, and he's not being paid for these appearances, but he's doing it because he loves his country and he wants to see it be the best that it can possibly be.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of good, positive things going on there. But yeah, back to the government side, the Trump administration side, they've really gutted the entire administration of any civil servants or, skilled diplomats. Hence, you don't have anybody with really good regional knowledge that really understands, not just the IPAC talking points. Lebanon's a good example. Not just the IPAC talking points, but really understands not just the situation, the history, the precedent, but understanding the position that the United States has put Lebanon in after 50 years, how it's just strangled its government and strangled the economy of that country to make it subservient. But they're acting like that's never happened.
Yeah.
And they're acting like they don't have auditing power over the Lebanese army's equipment. They're saying, they're not bringing up the fact that Lebanon's not allowed to have air defense because the U.S. imposed that restriction on their military, and that Lebanon's not allowed to have an air force. Most Americans aren't aware of this.
Yeah.
The United States prohibits them. So guess what? They can't engage with Israel. Their policy is not to engage with the invading Israeli army. So guess who engages? Who's left to engage with Israel? It's Hezbollah.
Of course, yeah.
And that's not a U.S. policy, Daniel. That's coming from the Israeli lobby, you see.
Yeah.
So that it comes from Tel Aviv to Washington and boomerangs back to Beirut. That's how that process works. Americans need to understand that and why it's by design. And this is key. And this is what you will not get from any of the media analysts, and probably not even in the podcast circuit either. That the whole basis of the proscription of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, which legally it is by the U.S. government and its allies, and of course Israel. Israel has imposed that on the U.S. and its allies.
Yeah.
And that's to isolate Hezbollah so that they can frame this whole situation in Lebanon as a war on terror. That gives them carte blanche to bomb. It gives them carte blanche to displace 1.5 million people and collateral damage, and to move in and occupy totally outside of international law and ignoring a whole litany, no pun intended, of UN Security Council resolutions on that very issue. It's to isolate Hezbollah so it can be dealt with as a terrorist entity, when in fact Hezbollah has no expeditionary terrorist operations. They are literally organic, indigenous to Lebanon. And they are the largest holder of seats in the Lebanese parliament, the political wing. So they've criminalized, a third of Lebanon, basically, and that's by design. Because if they weren't proscribed, they would probably do what Iraq did and integrate under the MOD with the regular army. The Hashd al-Shabi came under the Department of Defense in Iraq, and then they could fight together with their national army and the Hashid. Hezbollah would work with the Lebanese army, but the policy of Israel making the U.S. impose this sectarian division and framing it under terrorism, and that is, Daniel, that's the seed of all of our problems here.
Yeah.
That's the reason why Israel's allowed to have troops in there and nobody's pushing back very hard, because they claim they're fighting terror. And most Americans are so brainwashed they can't ask the simple question of why is Hezbollah proscribed as a terrorist organization? It's like a religious doctrine now. It's like a totem that is untouchable. You can't question it. The same with Hamas. And what I'm going to say is this: the UN recognizes under international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions the right to resist in armed resistance against illegal occupation. That's enshrined in international law. Now, people might say, well, what can you do? The PLO has moved off of the proscription list, and they're a legitimate political organization. Yeah. So the MEK, the U.S. took the MEK off the terrorist list and allowing them to pour money into the pockets of U.S. politicians now. So it can be reversed, but that is one of the central problems. That's the gridlock, Daniel. That's where the stalemate is. It's that little detail that's not so little once it's extrapolated out. And so if people could really address that, if the press would address that, some of the great thinkers in the press would ask that question. It's a hard question. but to pressure politicians to say, why are you insisting on this policy?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, and this is where the history comes in, Daniel. They blame Hezbollah for the 1983 Beirut Marine barracks bombing. Hezbollah did not form as an organization nor release a manifesto till 1985.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're going to ask yourself, well, how is this? Well, thanks to the CIA cooking up some intelligence, claiming that they were secretly hiding behind the Islamic Jihad, who actually took credit for the barracks bombing in '83, and they retroactively pieced together this case through a civil case in federal court of the victims of the families of the Marines who died in there, and that was adjudicated on a number of periods. I think most recently in, I believe, even in 2024, there was also another ruling on that. But the whole point was to use Iranian frozen assets for a massive legal payout. But to do that, you had to prove that Hezbollah did the '83 bombing. So the CIA and so intelligence sources helped to piece that story together, you see. And it was really about getting hands on the money. Yeah. If you really look at it, and that, so why I'm bringing this up is there's a lot of nuance in here, and this is the core of the problem. That's where the gridlock is. That's where the stalemate is. It's on that very issue. So how come nobody can really look into this and address it? Because to me, it's a very easy solution that would unravel a Gordian knot that we are looking at right now in Lebanon.
Well, when people start trying to look at it, you get Thomas Massie or you get Marjorie Taylor Greene, is what happens to you here. But I think we're going to have to close out, Patrick, and I think we could go on a lot longer, and I appreciate your insights. We're both thinking about a lot of the same things. But I do want to make sure that our viewers have the opportunity to follow you and your organization. So you want to go ahead and plug, and I'll also include, of course, in the comments, I'll include links to your sites, but give a plug for your organization and your work.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll drop you the links to your producer as well after this recording, Daniel. But 21stcenturywire.com is the mothership. That's an independent media news and analysis website. We've been going since 2009. Been around for a while, and we're getting stronger and stronger. We're doing great investigative reporting. We've reinvested a lot into the journalism side, as well as the written journalism, because we believe that's the foundation of the knowledge base that we think we need to build, and to allow people to be better informed, as well as the video content that we do. So we're also on YouTube. We have a channel on YouTube, heavily suppressed, but we're fighting through nonetheless. And also Instagram has been a very successful platform. We were very successful on TikTok until recently. I think the ownership change had something to do with that. So, but you'll find us there. And I'm on Substack, patrickhenningsen.substack.com.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Patrick. It's great to reconnect with you again. Hopefully we'll be able to meet again sometime in DC or something when you're back over here. But encourage everyone to look into 21st Century Wire. And I do want to thank everyone for tuning into Liberty Report Extra.